Good morning and welcome to another Finish It Friday. Today I have a tip that I want to share with you, and it came to my attention because I had someone ask a question about a flat back stitch on our EPP, and I didn't think anything about it at first, and then the more I thought about it, I decided that it would be helpful to people, especially who are not well versed in EPP or who are just starting out with EPP, to know a little bit more about the stitches. So that's what I hope to share with you today. I want to demonstrate both the whip stitch and the flat back stitch as I understand them, and give you a few of my thoughts about when they're really good to use and when they can be more trouble than they're worth. And welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. So we're going to get started here. I've got a couple of dark diamond pieces from the project I'm currently working on. And you see they're in dark fabric, and I've put down this white fabric so I hope that you can see really well what we're going to do. And we're going to use a white thread. Normally, if I were using a dark piece like this and I were sewing darks together, I would probably use a medium to dark thread so that they would show less. Now the project I'm working on, this is actually the white fabric for this project, and most of the fabrics are either white or pastel or pattern, and then we have these dark solid pieces that we're adding right now. And we do actually have one darker green that we're going to use, and I may decide at that point to use the darker thread with the darker, even darker green, but right now I'm just using white with these on the piece, and it seems to do fine. Now a couple of concepts before we get started. EPP is the process of folding fabric around paper to create shapes. And usually this is done by basting those fabrics in place. The fabric is folded over this shape, and this is a shape similar to this one. It's folded over, it's folded at the corners to give you nice points, and sometimes where you have very sharp points like this, you will also have a tail. Don't cut those off. Leave them there. They'll just sit behind the piece that you end up sewing next to it. And many times they will fit together very nicely behind the pattern that you're working on. Now, there are generally two ways to baste your pieces. Some people glue baste them, meaning that when they fold the fabric over the paper or the cardboard or whatever you're using, they will glue the fabric to itself, or they will glue the fabric to the paper piece. Either one is acceptable. It just really depends on how you like to work it. I don't like to fool with the glue at all. So I am using a stitch-based method where I'm stitching the folds as they come together, and then I skip down to the next fold, and I sew through whatever layers of fabric are there to almost create a little knot. Sometimes it's just the thread going around it, and sometimes it's an actual knot. And what that does is it keeps those pieces in place so they don't come apart. So on this one, I've started here, I've sewn around, knotted it here, and I'm done. I did not go through the papers. Some people sew right through the papers. And I think it depends on whether you intend to use the papers again, whether you are looking to speed up that basting process by going through it, or if that's just something you're more comfortable with. Again, your personal preference. But today our focus is on sewing these together. Let me grab a clip because I think since I'm unlikely to grow another arm, that's going to be our best way to do this today. I use clips to hold these together when I'm sewing. Actually, I use clips when I'm basting too. I'll fold it around and put the clips in place and do a bunch of them, and then I'll come in and baste and take them out as I baste. But we've got these two together, and we want to sew this side together so that they look like this. So that's our goal right there. And you see how that one tail just sits behind the other. Okay, the first concept, the first stitch we're going to look at is the whip stitch. I always use one single thread. It's got a knot at the end of it. You won't see that knot. And we're going to come up underneath the fabric, between the fabric and the paper, on the back side in a point. That's where I'm going to start this one. Now, a whip stitch, we're going to come into the next fabric on the next piece, and we're going to whip it around, and we're going to take our next stitch. Now, since this is on the corner, we're going to have two stitches right there on the corner. You could knot it if you want to, but I don't think it's really necessary. And that's what a whip stitch is. You come in through one side, you go out through the other piece, here to here, and you're whipping it around. Now I find that this is super fast. That's one of the reasons I like it, is that it's really fast. Couple of things you want to keep in mind. When you stitch in, you only want to get a couple of threads from each piece. Let's see if our problem here is that we don't have really good light. Maybe that's good. Can you see that? So we're stitching around like that. Only a couple of threads, and we don't want to catch the edge of the paper. Now you can run that needle right next to the paper, but you don't want to catch the paper. And the more you do it, the easier it is to determine just how far you can get in and how far you don't want to get in. But usually I can do one of these, I would say, in about 30 to 40 seconds, because it's like 12, 14 stitches down the side of this. I use paper pieces from Paper Pieces. You can cut your own. There are other suppliers. When I first started doing this, the first order I got from Paper Pieces, I was just very disappointed that they weren't very thick. I thought it had to be thicker, like a piece of cardboard, a cereal box piece of cardboard. But what I quickly realized was they were plenty thick enough. And you can do EPP with just regular paper. It's just a little more difficult, and they don't tend to be as reusable. The Paper Pieces have worked out great for me because they are reusable. Sometimes you need to iron them just a bit to get them straight again, because with the handling they will become misshapen. But a nice quick iron with a dry iron seems to work out just great. Okay, when I get down to the bottom of this where I've got these tails, I'm just going to pull one of the tails back so I can see where those two pieces go together. And I am just continuing to sew all the way down to the point. And sometimes that point is actually the tail. Now you want these stitches pretty snug, pretty tight, but you don't want them so tight that they're going to pucker your fabric. Okay, and I'm going to put two little knots on the end. Now what I do with the end of this thread is I'll run it back up one side between the fabric and the paper, pull it through, and then clip it off. And that will just make it more difficult for that piece of thread to ever come out of there. So because I've taken very little bites when I go through those two, when I open it up, from a distance you don't see it. If I tug on them or pull them this way, you will begin to see those stitches. So, do you want to see the stitches? Some people like to see the stitches because it's handwork and they want to see where they've done it. I don't particularly want to see them, but if I see them occasionally, that's okay. But keep in mind that when you finish this and you take those papers out, where that fabric is stretched out, you take the paper out, it loosens up. And when it loosens up, it's almost like it's shrinking a bit, and those stitches will become even more invisible. Now, one of the good things that I like about whip stitch is that if I have a situation where one piece, either because the paper piece itself or the way it was basted or folded is a little bit longer, a whip stitch is easy to adjust because you can take and stitch in on the regular size piece. And then if your other piece is too long, you can go a little bit further, like 2 threads down and stitch in. And that little gentle 2 threads will pull it back into place. You may have to do it a couple of times. I don't ever try to do it more than twice, and then I'll take a regular stitch. And if it still hasn't done the trick, then I'll do 2 more. But it allows you to kind of bring that longer piece back in line with the shorter piece. If you do it too much, you're going to be able to tell. So that's why I just do 2 and a regular stitch or 2, and then I might do 2 more to kind of draw it in. On the other hand, if one piece is much too short, you can do the same thing. With your short piece, you're going to put your stitches really close together so that when they match up with the other piece, it kind of draws them out a bit. You've got a little bit of adjustment there. So that's what whip stitch is. I like it because it's fast, it's easy, and it's a little easier to hold because you've got these pieces folded and you've got that edge out that you're sewing on. Now sometimes people use a flat back stitch because they don't want their stitches to show. And I do that sometimes, but more than likely when I use a flat back stitch, it's because I cannot fold those 2 pieces to use a whip stitch. Either because of the design, because you're going to need some kind of flat line to be able to fold them right sides together. And you don't always have that. With this project that I'm working on, sometimes you don't. So you have a situation where you need to sew them together just like that. So a flat back stitch is going to be that you're going to lay these out just like this. Now it makes it harder to use a clip to hold them for you because where is the clip going to go? You're going to have to straddle that clip over both sides like this. Or if you're going to start there, maybe you're going to have to straddle this on this side, and it just becomes a little more difficult to do. Sometimes you can, but sometimes you can't. The other option, and I don't think I do have tape. The other option that some folks use is to tape these 2 pieces together. And you can use any kind of tape really. You don't want something that's super, super sticky, but a masking tape, a painting tape, a scotch tape, something like that's going to work. So you will tape the right sides of these 2 pieces together like that, and then you can sew from the back. And I think that's the way we'll do it for this demonstration because it'll just help hold it in place. If you had a very complicated design, I would think that's the way you'd want to do it too. So again, we're just going to use a single thread with a knot. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to come in here at the corner. And theoretically, you should be able to do all of this with the pieces sitting down. And I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way down. Now, I'll be honest with you, the flat back is not my favorite. I don't particularly enjoy it. I find it more difficult to do. I don't like how fiddly it is to hold it, but that's just my personal opinion, and yours may vary. But what you're going to do now is you're going to come in from one side, trying to keep your needle horizontal to the surface, and you're going to come in and have that needle come out right at the edge, and then go right back in at the edge and come out on top. And we'll do that. Whoops. Wrapped around. And we're going to bring the needle back in that loop so we get a little knot. And then we're just going to keep coming down. Let's see. Try to make sure that you can see in our overhead camera. In here, this is all perpendicular to the paper. So see, we've caught just 2 or 3 little threads here on both sides for both pieces, and then we're going to come over and do the next one. Now you could choose to go back this way and come this way. I just kind of do it like a modified whip stitch where I'm going back to the other side. Keeping that, you want to keep it snug, of course. I think I'm just a little too impatient to do this. And in a lot of ways, it is a whip stitch. You're just not whipping it over the edge of the fabric. You're just doing it flat. Now the benefit is supposed to be that you should not see any stitches because all of your stitches are done on the back side of the paper. I don't always find that to be the situation, but we'll see how our example here works out. Let me check one more time. Are we seeing that? I need to bring it out just a little bit so you can see it. Again, you want your stitches to be pretty close, and that one got way out of there. We are about 3/4 of the way down this now. I'm trying to do this a little bit slower than I normally would, just to be super careful to get the effect that this stitch is supposed to have. And we're going to need to hold this down. That might be something we could use our clip for. I find that I use a flat back stitch more as the project gets bigger because we got pieces going in all different directions. And see, the end of that piece is right there, right at the end of my nail. So we need about 2 or 3 more stitches. And we'll let this one be the last one. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to come back through that circle, and then we're going to do that one more time right on top of it, and back through the circle, and that should form our knot. Oops, we're going to put this through. I think we're just going to come up. There we go. And clip it off. You can see that they're both pretty neat from the back side. There's not, they look, to me, they look exactly the same. Now you could use some kind of ladder stitch, but you want to keep those threads pretty close on that area where they're joining together. Okay, so then let's take this tape off. You could probably reuse that. And what do we have? Now, this one, this is the whip stitch. This does show the stitches just a little bit more. This is the flat back, and you've got virtually no stitches showing. So when you take the papers out, it's going to be invisible, I think. You might, if you fold it over like that, you can see them. But if you're working with something that seeing those stitches, you just don't want that at all, that's probably the way to go. This one's just faster, and I've not noticed in doing it, even if I don't use a coordinating color, that they really show that much once you take the papers off. But that's just a quick overview of the whip stitch and the flat back stitch, how I do them. There are variations, and people do them differently. If you're a lefty, you are going to be holding that different, and you're going to be stitching from the other side, so it's going to look a little different. And if you don't like hand stitching at all, but you are interested in doing EPP, I have seen tutorials where they use the machine and run this place where these two pieces join right in the stitch line, and they use a decorative stitch so that it'll hook over to one side and hook over to the other side. What is concerning to me, or thought-provoking perhaps, is it would seem like when you did that, you're going to be stitching through your papers, so it's going to make it a little more difficult to get your papers out, or maybe even impossible. I'm not sure. If you're interested in doing something like that, maybe take a look at some other videos of folks who do that and are very well versed at it to see what tips and tricks they might have for that. I hope you've enjoyed this little tutorial or tip sharing episode for EPP with the flat back stitch and the whip stitch. Either one I find to be very easy to do. I just prefer the whip stitch. I think it's a little bit easier. The other one is not bad at all. And I think the whip stitch is faster, but you're going to have to use your personal preference for that. So either way, we've got 2 more pieces to put together for our project, and we're going to get right back to that. And while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and cut some more strips for our white pieces, because I've used just about all the 4 strips I had the other day. I hope you've enjoyed this and it's been helpful for you. If you have any questions about this, leave them in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer those either directly to you in the comments or through a video. Again, I appreciate you being here. I hope you have a great weekend sewing. Be sure to like us, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next week at the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Bye!